Everybody has seen photos of the attack on September 11th. These photos make it appear as if a few Arabs attacked America, and that the airplane crashes and fires caused the buildings to collapse. However, when we take a close look at how the buildings collapsed, it appears as if explosives were used. For example, dust shot out of some of the windows far below the collapsing area. This dust is caused by extremely high pressure, but it comes out of only a few windows. When we look closely at the area that is collapsing, we find dust shooting out of every window of the entire floor at the same time. The towers had a steel frame, so the only way they could collapse is if thousands of joints were broken. The towers collapsed in less than 10 seconds, which is an average of 10 floors every second. Next time you see a 10-story building, imagine the entire building collapsing in 1 second. The only buildings that collapse this quickly are the buildings that are destroyed with explosives. We were told that the collapse began when one floor broke, and the pieces fell to the floor below it. Those pieces shattered that floor, and so on, all the way down. However, when the pieces hit the floor below, they will slow down slightly, because some of their energy will be used to break the floor. Therefore, there should be a delay every time the pieces hit a floor. The towers had 110 floors, so if it took 1 second for each floor to be crushed, that would be 110 seconds. However, the seismic data and video show that the North Tower collapsed in only 8.4 seconds. The collapse started at about the 94th floor. If you were to drop a rock from the 94th floor, it would hit the ground about 8.4 seconds later. This means that the pieces of the building were falling as fast as objects fall through the air. How can objects crash through steel and concrete floors as fast as they fall through the air? There is only one explanation. Explosives were placed in these buildings before the attack. The North Tower started to collapse when explosives at the 94th floor were detonated. The explosives were timed so that the floors were shattered before the pieces contacted it. The pieces of the building fell in only 8.4 seconds because none of the pieces crashed into a floor. We were told that fire caused the towers to collapse, but no large building has ever collapsed from a fire. The 32-story building in Madrid, Spain, is a good example. The fire became so intense that it spread from one floor to the next, causing the building to look like a torch. This fire was much larger than the fire at the World Trade Center. The next morning there were still a few fires in the lower floors. Everything inside the building had been burned. Some sections of the building broke, and a few portions at the top of the building collapsed. However, the building remained standing, and it continued to support a large construction crane at the top. By comparison, the fire in the South Tower was so small that it never spread to the other side of the tower. We know that a few firemen made it up to the fire zone of the South Tower because they used their handheld radios to send reports about the fire. They said there were only a few areas with fire. Obviously, the fire was too small to kill firemen, but we are supposed to believe that it was large enough to cause the buildings to collapse after burning for only 56 minutes. The fire in Madrid, Spain, was much more intense, and it burned all night, but it did not cause the building to collapse. Scientists created this temperature map of the rubble 5 days after the collapse. Obviously, the rubble would be cooler after 5 days. Also, firemen sprayed water on the rubble during those 5 days. However, one location in the rubble of Building 7 was above the melting point of aluminum, and so was one location in the rubble of the South Tower. How can a building fall down, and 5 days later the pieces are hot enough to melt aluminum? The presidents of 2 different companies that were cleaning up the area told Christopher Bolin that steel had melted in the basements of the towers and Building 7. These incredible temperatures are more evidence that explosives were used. Another suspicious aspect of the attack is the collapse of Building 7. This was a 47-story building with a steel frame. It was not hit by an airplane. It was across the street from the towers. Late in the afternoon, this building collapsed. The government investigated the collapse of this building. However, after 7 months of investigating, their conclusion was they have no idea why the building collapsed. A few months later, the landlord of the building, Larry Silverstein, announced on television that the fire department demolished the building. The government and news reporters should have asked Silverstein and the fire department to explain what happened to Building 7, but nobody asked any questions. The collapse of Building 7 is identical to the collapse of buildings that are brought down with explosives. The explosives shatter the joints that hold the building together, and the building falls down at free fall speed. Dust is produced at the base of the building. There is a tremendous amount of evidence that the government created the September 11th attack. We could spend days discussing all of it. My accusation that the towers were demolished with explosives is based on scientific fact, and you cannot disagree with it. For example, pieces of a building cannot crash through steel and concrete floors as fast as they fall through the air. The fact that those towers collapsed in 10 seconds is proof that explosives destroyed the towers. Building 7 also collapsed in a manner that can only be explained with explosives. This is why the government says they do not know why Building 7 collapsed. Anybody who looks at this evidence and continues to insist that fires caused the buildings to collapse is simply having a difficult time facing the possibility that a government could commit such a crime. Another reason it is difficult to believe the government created the September 11th attack is because none of the major news agencies are talking about it. Some reporters refuse to talk about explosives in the World Trade Center because they are afraid to expose the crimes of the American government. Another reason for the silence is that the television, magazines, and newspapers of America and Europe are controlled by a small number of people. These people prevent the reporters from talking about explosives in the World Trade Center. Instead of telling us about the explosives, they show lots of photos of Osama bin Laden. This creates anger towards Arabs, and it fools people into thinking that the Arabs are responsible for the attack. The news agencies are trying to manipulate emotions, not provide serious information. Most reporters ignore us when we talk about explosives in the towers. Occasionally, a magazine or television program tries to make us look like idiots. Already, 3 different television networks have criticized us. These television programs do not provide serious information to counteract our arguments. Instead, they use insults to make people laugh at us. Here is how they introduce Jimmy Walter.
And then there's this asshole. Man, that's way too soft. Let me try that again. And then there's this asshole!
My book has been available for almost 3 years, but it was ignored by the large magazines and television shows until Jimmy Walter began advertising it. This is a portion of one of his full-page newspaper ads. Here is how Penn and Teller describe my book.
He wrote a book called Painful Questions, an analysis of the September 11th attack. We show you the cover because if you ever see anyone carrying it, push them down a flight of stairs.
Popular Mechanics refers to us as liars. The angry and childish attacks on Jimmy Walter and me could be a sign that the criminals are frightened that we are exposing them. However, when a criminal tries to cover up his crime, he runs the risk of releasing more information about himself. These television shows and magazines can help us understand who is behind the September 11th attack and how they get away with these crimes. The executives of the major television networks, magazines, and newspapers are involved in these crimes. They help cover up the crimes by ignoring important information and by insulting those of us who complain about the crimes. The news agencies that ignore or insult us are identifying themselves as being either incompetent news agencies or as members of the criminal network. In either case, we should not purchase their newspapers, magazines, or television programs. We could use our technology to build beautiful cities for ourselves with advanced train systems, but we need better governments and better news reporters. We must also prevent the criminals from getting control of the 9/11 organizations. I will give you an example. I had been invited to speak at a meeting about September 11th in March of 2004 in San Francisco. However, a week before the meeting, I was told that I was not allowed to speak. They did not explain why I could not speak. I think the criminals are trying to get control of the 9/11 organizations so that they can remove people like me. They fool you into thinking they are on your side. They are trying to put all the blame on President Bush or Dick Cheney. They do not want you to know about the evidence that lots of people from several nations are involved, such as U.S. military officials, television executives, and some Israeli and British government officials. People often respond that they cannot do anything about this corruption because they are just an ordinary person of no importance. But everybody can help make this world a better place simply by showing our books, videos, and websites to your friends. So help us educate and encourage people. Let's make this a better world.